Welcome to the Dwig America podcast. And now your host, Todd Dwiggins.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of the Dwig America podcast. I am your host, Todd Dwiggins. On today's podcast, I'm going to talk about 5 things that I have been thinking about. So let's get started. Number 1. So I'm driving my kids to school today, and I get cut off in traffic by someone, and they have a Army Medal Commendation plate, license plate. So whenever someone like that cuts me off or does something in the similar fashion driving, I tend to give them a break because I'm like, dude, that's an American hero. I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to say a word. I'll just bite my tongue. And I thought, you know what? Driving is probably the worst way to judge anyone. Probably the single worst way to judge anyone. I found some of the nicest people, some of the people I would love to be around, my kids to be around, are horrendous drivers. People may say I'm a horrendous driver. Who knows? But I used to always judge people like, hey, if that person lets someone kind of get in line, gives someone extra room, extra polite driving, they must be the nicest people. And those that don't do those things, that cut, to do whatever you want, tailgating, whatever sort of thing drives you nuts driving, those must be horribly selfish, terrible human beings. And I don't know why it took me so long, but I just kind of realized that's not how I should judge someone. Again, I'm letting the guy with the Army Commendation Medal license plates off the hook because their license plates tell me a story. It tells me, hey, I served in the Army. Now, if someone cut me off in traffic and they have a I Love Jesus bumper sticker, I would be like, what a hypocrite. They say they love Jesus, but they drive like the devil. Okay, not fair and uncalled for. So I just, one of those things that I realize, maybe you don't, I'm sure no one else does it. Maybe I'm the only one. Maybe I'm the only person that looks at how someone drives and judges them that way. So anyway, I've tried to let it go and get that off my judgmental plate, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, anytime someone would do something, I always just assumed the worst of them, that they were a horrible human being, selfish. But I know some people that are terrible drivers and wonderful people. I don't know if I know any great drivers that are horrible people, but I don't really hang out with horrible people, so I don't know. Maybe the lesson is there really aren't horrible people. Okay, maybe that's not true either. So anyway, that's my first thought of the day. So you can respond and tell me if you think that's true or not. Please email me at dwigomaniac@gmail.com. You can also send a message on Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter guy, but there is one for the Dwig America podcast, so if you want to respond on there, that's fine too. Let me know if I'm out of my gourd or if you agree. My next thought was a story from way back when, so let's go back in time with Todd and talk about a lesson I should have learned a long time ago. That lesson is never do anything or make a decision out of anger or fear. Now, this is a lesson I should have learned when I was much younger, because one time I went up to Chicago on a field trip. And at this field trip, I was sitting in a cafeteria, sitting across from a girl who I had a huge crush on. And I wanted to look cool around her, and I was coolly eating my Cheetos. And if you've had Cheetos, you know you get the cheesy Cheeto fingers. And so, not thinking, because I was 13, 14, however old I was, I began putting my fingers in my mouth and licking off the cheese residue off my fingers, not thinking anything about it. When one of my leaders of the field trip, one of the adult leaders, came, put over my shoulder a napkin, and said, "Hey, there's more where these came from," and completely embarrassed me. Humiliated. I can't believe the dude did it, is what I was thinking. I can't believe he embarrassed me in front of this girl. You made me look silly and incompetent and so angry. I got up from the table and I stormed off into the restroom, and I began washing my hands. I can hear someone in one of the stalls, so I don't say too much, but I'm kind of mumbling to myself, washing my hands off. I burst back out of the bathroom door, and as I walk out of the bathroom door, there's a little 4 or 5-year-old girl looking right at me. She stares at me, she looks above my head, looks back at me and says, "Hey, that's the women's restroom." And I said, "Yeah, I know," and stormed off. Yeah, of course I didn't know. So then I'm doubly embarrassed because the girl that I stormed off from, that was sitting at the table that I stormed off from, she saw it, and she was cool, but yeah, I completely made a fool of myself twice. So never make a decision when you're angry. Just common sense. Just trying to help you out here. I'm sure no one else has ever done that. So just a friendly tip. That's tip number 2 for today. Hey, you're welcome. Tip number 3 for today. So this past weekend, my wife and I went to a Army-sponsored couples retreat. You brought your children, but they would go somewhere else, and they had childcare available. But then you would go to this couples retreat and talk about relationship things. Basically, this was on trust. So anyway, when we were done, as my wife and I were talking, 2 things really stood out in my mind that had really, in a sense, weren't brought up in the seminar. Maybe they were, but the 2 things that we took away from it, and for marriage to work, there's my Indiana coming out whenever you hear me say "fur" instead of "for," or if I say "member" instead of "remember." I'm digressing. Number 1 is communicate your concerns clearly so you each know where you're standing. And number 2 is one that I think was the most profound that we came up with for us. And maybe you already do this if you're in a relationship, but it's kind of like this. 1, you should be each other's biggest fans, biggest cheerleaders. And 2, always think the best about the other. And not just in marriage. I think people in general, we should look at the best. I think a lot of times it's hard to not look at ulterior motives or what's in it for me. And I'm not talking marriage. I'm just talking about relationships in general with people. But in marriage, really, it's important, I think, to look for the best in each other and the best motivations. And I think when you look at each other with the best motivations in mind, and you're each other's biggest cheerleader, that's just going to move it forward. I think it's when we self-absorb and worry about our feelings and our point of view, that's when I think we tend to struggle with communication and those other issues. So if nothing else comes out of the little retreat, I thought just that talk that we had and kind of came to a consensus with was probably the best thing that came from it. So there you go. Point number 3. Point number 4 for today. let's go back to my discussion. If you listened to episode 2, my introduction to myself, talked a little bit about Facebook. So this is my helpful hint for Facebook for those of you that are wondering about how to deal with this. So I don't know about anybody else, but the people that pound the politics down your throat, really, those people drive me crazy. Hey, good on you that you have passion for it, but my thing is, I've either heard your opinion and agree, I've either heard your opinion or disagree, or number 3, I probably don't care. And so, in all 3 cases, I don't need it on Facebook personally. I'm not saying don't put it. If you want to put it, you're right, you can do it. But for those of us that don't want to hear it, let me tell you what you can do. You can go on Facebook, you can click that person's name, their Facebook page will come up, and it'll show that you're friends, and it'll say you're following. If you don't want to hear what they have to say, especially during the political season, you can click following, and it will give you options to default, which is to follow, unfollow, or see first. So if you're tired of hearing someone that constantly talks about whether it's politics or anything else, and you don't want to hear anything else from them, you're tired of it, you can just unfollow them. They're still your friend, and I guess that's good enough. And then if you want to follow them later, go back. You can search their name up and then go the default or whatever you want to do with that. That is how I deal with the Facebook people that just do a little too much of whether it's politics or whatever they talk about a lot. Just a helpful hint. And so I've unfollowed and refollowed people all the time. In fact, I think my mom unfollowed me on accident. But thanks, Mom. That felt good. That felt good. And finally today, let me respond to some listener feedback. So here we go. Listener feedback from the first 2 episodes of the Dwig America podcast. Hey, you have a wonderful voice. I think you should do well. I liked it. You are good. So let me respond to that. Thanks, Mom. Thanks again for the feedback. Appreciate it. Makes me feel warm inside. So if you would like to hear actual feedback from actual listeners, help me out here. And if you know how to share it, share this if you enjoyed it. If you don't enjoy it, please, you don't have to share it. If you listen to it, I'm shocked that you've got this far. But if you enjoyed it, share it, comment back, dwigamaniac@gmail.com, DWIGAMANIAC@gmail.com. I do have a Twitter feed, which is Dwig America, and Facebook, Dwig America Podcast. Anyway, email, Twitter, Facebook, all those are great ways to get a hold of me. I would appreciate any feedback whatsoever. And again, share it, like it, whatever. Well, that's it for today's show, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Appreciate all your support. Continue to give me the feedback, and promise you I will continue to improve and get better as time goes on. I'll have guests, co-hosts, be much more interactive. So thanks for giving me a try, letting me experiment with this thing. And again, hopefully you enjoy it and it continues to get better and better. So until next time, thanks for listening in. So long, everybody.